Good morning. I think we are ready, so we will start with this session dedicated to the economic performance of SMEs. My name is Maria Muñoz. I am Deputy Director for SMEs in the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Tourism of Spain. And it's my pleasure to present our speakers from the European Commission, Uti Slotblom, from Eurochambres, Ben Butters, and also from Lisbon Council, David Osimo. We had barely emerged from the crisis, from the pandemic, when Russia's invasion of Ukraine marked the beginning of another crisis. The effects are very visible in SMEs, basically high energy prices and of raw materials and persistent inflation, which threaten the recovery process initiated in 2021. As Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said, we must remove the obstacles that still hold our companies back. So, during this session, we will analyze three main reports. First, the SME Economic Performance Review 2021 by UTI from the European Commission. Second, Green, Digital and Competitive, an SME Agenda for the 21st Century from Lisbon Council. And third, the Economic Survey 2022 by Eurochambres. Speakers will explore the performance of SMEs in 2022 with a view to discussing which policy measures need to be better designed or implemented to help SMEs meet the challenges ahead. And in particular, as regards, of course, the twin transition and also the SME relief package. The session will be structured as follows. First, our speakers will present briefly the conclusions and recommendations in these three reports. And second, we will leave time for debate and questions from the audience, both here and online. And having said this, I give the floor to Mrs. Slotblom from the European Commission.
Thank you very much, Maria. Good morning, everybody. Very happy to be here to present our SME data and how we see the situation. I have a set of slides, so if somebody could turn them on. Yes, exactly. We have our annual report, which comes out roughly June every year. It's a very rich data source on how SMEs are faring, what they are, where they are, how they are doing. And every year we have one special topic. This year's topic was the greening, how small and medium-sized enterprises can become green, what they are doing, what obstacles they face. So I will speak first about the general picture and then a bit about greening. So this a very rough picture of where we see the economy going and our nowcast and forecast for SMEs. There was a huge dip in the value added during the pandemic, as we all know. However, the recovery was maybe even unexpectedly strong and has continued until early this year. For next year, and also in line with the Commission's general macroeconomic forecast, we see a sharp decline again. We even expect a drop in SME employment and value added next year, which would reverse the recovery in the current year. This is of what we assume has happened in the last phases of recovery. The interesting thing to mention on this slide is that it seems to be micro companies growing the fastest for as long as the recovery was there. All SMEs, you see a growth rate in employment in 2022 of roughly 3%, but clearly the micro enterprises and to some extent the small ones leading the recovery. Here, in terms of the obstacles to growth, we quote survey results where very clearly you see that the availability of skilled staff has, when the recovery took strength, grown into the biggest obstacle of SMEs for their growth. This is data from 2021 compared to 2020, in case you wonder what the number on the slide says. So it's not terribly recent, but the Commission also runs monthly surveys which exist until October this year, and we very much see for all companies in one block that availability of skilled staff remains a big issue. And it is very much supply side constraints, finding raw materials, equipment, labor, which dominate on the side of our concerns. It is no longer finding consumers or lacking demand. It's really supply side issues. Now, moving to the green transition, why is it important to look at SMEs? Sometimes I hear people say that it's the big companies in energy intensive sectors which create emissions, but this is not true. The greenhouse gas emissions of SMEs more or less correspond to their share in total employment in the private sector. So it is very important that when we work on climate policies and greening, energy savings, that we get all the SMEs along. Here, another survey, our flash Eurobarometer on what the obstacles are for SMEs to green their policies. You see a large number of things. If I can pick out one thing, and of course all the data are available, these have been published, but if I can pick one thing which I personally found important for us policymakers and for policymakers at all levels, it's the fact that SMEs say that the complexity of regulation in the area of greening is an obstacle even bigger than the cost of environmental actions. It's the difficulty in implementing some of the rules, it's the lack of the right skills, maybe also lack of the required inputs. And this regulatory challenge even dominates the cost of greening. And I think this is one thing that I really take home from the whole survey. Here, we asked SMEs if they have a strategy for becoming climate neutral or for reducing their carbon footprint. Well, the answer is yes, 1 out of 5 has a strategy. More than 1/2 do not have a strategy for greening and are not planning to have one. However, it is not true that this means that SMEs are not doing anything. If you look at what they are already doing a lot, even without an explicit strategy. That is my last slide. This is a slide based on the Eurobarometer done last year. What are SMEs doing to become more resource efficient? Minimizing waste on top, saving energy as number 2. And I believe that if you ask the SMEs today, probably saving energy due to the huge increase in energy prices since the survey was done might come up as number 1. Yeah. Saving materials, saving water, recycling, but also, not to forget, looking further into the future, designing products, designing processes which are better for the environment, so really preparing for the future. So this is where I would stop my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Uti, for your concise presentation. Now I give the floor to David Osimo from Lisbon Council. Thank you, David.
This one, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. My name is David Osimo. I work at the Lisbon Council, a Brussels-based think tank. And I'm going to present a study we did on the twin transition of SMEs. No, this is not my presentation.
This is Ben's.
This is me. Shall I go first?
Change.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's easier.
Sorry, we didn't have set up a specific order, so
Okay,
maybe.
I'll go first then.
Don't worry. Thank you, Ben. Sorry for that.
Thanks, Maria. Hi, everyone.
But it was your name on that.
So, glad to be here. Those of you who were in Portoros last year will remember that I presented the results of our 2022 economic survey then, and this year I'm presenting the results of the 2023 edition. We name it after the coming year because basically in the survey we're asking businesses to tell us what their expectations are for the year ahead. We run this via the Chamber Network, and they ask thousands of businesses. We usually get somewhere between 40 and 50,000 businesses replying to the survey. They're not all SMEs, but the vast majority are SMEs, so this data is relevant to the SME Assembly. And basically, we ask them all a simple list of questions about whether they expect things to improve, get worse, or stay the same. So that's in relation to 5 different indicators, and also we ask them what the main challenges will be for the year ahead, and I think a lot of them corroborate what Uti said a few minutes ago, but I'll come on to that in a moment. It's the 30th year in a row that we have done this economic survey. It would be nice to have some happy news to tell on this auspicious occasion of our 30th edition, but unfortunately, as you can imagine, the results are not massively optimistic. Indeed, they're pretty gloomy, I'm afraid, as you will see. So those of you who are of a delicate disposition, turn away now because the next few slides are not very pretty. This is the best one. So the first indicator I'm going to tell you about is national sales. So basically here you can see that there is a dip in the expectations on national sales, but they still, so if it's above 0, they expect an increase in the indicator. But the increase this year is lower than the previous year, so it's only a slight year-on-year increase, whereas 12 months ago businesses were expecting a slightly higher increase in domestic sales. We were in a period of getting out of the heavy lockdown restrictions, so the optimism was significantly higher last year, and that's a pattern you will see across all of the slides in the next couple of minutes. So there is a year-on-year drop in terms of expectations for domestic sales, but nonetheless they do expect them to increase slightly. That is the only one of the indicators which is above 0. I warn you now. As you can see here, in terms of export sales, businesses have a far more worrying forecast. They expect a significant drop in their export sales for next year, and again, compared to last year, where you could see that there was the expectations were pretty optimistic. We were bouncing back from all of those restrictions which precluded businesses from buying and selling across borders within the EU and internationally as well. And by the way, when we talk about exports from an SME perspective, that means outside their national market. So it could be exports within the EU or exports beyond the EU. So here you can see that the figure has dropped significantly, so businesses are expecting their export sales to drop sharply next year. Unfortunately, the same can be said for employment. We were really quite positive about the way that the Commission and national governments helped businesses to maintain jobs during the depths of the pandemic, but they're worried now that businesses are worried now that they won't be able to keep all of their employees because of the inflationary pressures they're incurring. Salaries are going up, sales are dropping in many cases, so they expect, unfortunately, to be reducing their workforce next year. And similarly, investments are likely to drop according to companies next year. It's harder for businesses to acquire bank loans, and they need those bank loans principally at the moment to deal with the inflationary cost of running their business rather than investing in new activities and new initiatives. And they do not expect to be investing very much next year, as you can see, and that's quite worrying, really. When we're talking about the recovery, that's clearly jeopardized if businesses are unable to invest and not expecting to invest much next year. And this one is the worst of the lot, I'm afraid. This is a general question we ask about their level of business confidence for next year. This is a barometer of the mood of the business community. This isn't highly scientific data. We're just gauging the business sentiment for the year ahead. And as you can see from the business confidence indicator, businesses are very worried about 2023. Strikingly, that's the worst figure we have ever had for the business confidence indicator over 30 years. Worse even than the depths of the financial crisis, and more recently compared to the pandemic when we were in the middle of lockdown. So that's, again, quite a worrying set of feedback from businesses about their expectations for next year. And the last point that I mentioned is challenges. We ask businesses what the main challenges that they expect to encounter will be next year. You can see the results of the new survey in blue, and the little red dots show you what the results were 12 months ago. For years and years and years, the number one challenge identified has been a lack of skilled workers. But for the last couple of years, that has dropped to second place in the rankings. And as you could expect, and as Uti mentioned as well, access to affordable energy and raw materials is the number one concern for businesses for next year. Skilled workers is number two still, as I said, and labour costs. So there's a complex relationship there between the cost of employing people and being able to identify people with the skills that businesses need for the digital transition, for the green transition. Recruiting people at the moment is very tough, isn't it? I'm sure you're hearing that from businesses around Europe as well. David's got his hand up, but I'm not.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
Supply chain disruption, there's no red dot on that. It's because it didn't register last year.
It's because we added it this year. We didn't have that as one of the challenges last year. We thought we'd add it this year because it was something that we were hearing about a lot this year. So that's the challenges. In terms of what that means for policy recommendations, we can come back to that during the Q&A perhaps, so I won't go into too much detail, but for us as a European Association of Chambers of Commerce representing millions and millions of SMEs, there are some key factors that we need to improve if we're going to help these businesses deal with this extremely challenging situation. I'm not going to go over them all now in the interests of time, but you can see them there, and I'd be happy to go back to that slide if appropriate later on. Some of the issues there, we mentioned a regulatory process that boosts competitiveness. Some of you may have attended the session yesterday when Lena and colleagues from SME United and Business Europe presented our benchmark on the way that the Commission does its SME tests, and that really is crucial in this context. We've got a lot of policy initiatives in the pipeline for 2023. And it really is important that we work with Uti and DG Grow and the other Directorates General of the Commission to make sure that their legislative proposals are as SME friendly as possible, so that we're not adding further burdens to this already extremely difficult context that businesses are trying to survive in for the coming months. I'll leave it there, Maria. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben. Now it's finally your time. Thank you, David.
Let's see if the presentation is the right one. Well, you know who I am by now. So we're presenting a study that is over there. You can see it at the back of the room on SME in the twin transition. And yes. And I mean, we are all aware of the goals of the twin transition, and we are all supportive of it. They are ambitious, they are bold, and they are soon. It's 2030, 8 years. We need 75 of business using cloud, data analytics. We need 55% reduction in carbon footprint. This is, coming soon. The issue is then, are we on track for that? Are we on the right path? Are we progressing? Particularly when it comes to SMEs, which, as we heard, as we know, they are the major part of the economy. And as the OECD puts it, no net zero without SMEs. So we focus on 3 rather than 2. We added a third point, which is competitive. And the reason, I think, if you were there on Monday night listening to Professor Zute, I think I don't need to explain the reason. We need Schumpeterian entrepreneurs if we want to achieve the twin transition. We need entrepreneurs that export not only our products, but also our values, our green and our digital values to the world. So, how do we track this? We track it through 3 pillars, 9 indicators, 31 sub-indicators. Each one of these indicators that you see on the outside is composed of further sub-indicators. So you see, green has resource consumption, emissions and output, digitalization, e-commerce and skills, and competitive, export, productivity, and growth. And these are all from official sources, typically Eurostat, or in some cases, Eurobarometer. And I will come back to that later. Now, one first important finding of the report is that green and digital go well together. There is a strong correlation between the countries and the SMEs that performs well on green and digital. And we have plenty of studies that say that going green and going digital helps with going green and vice versa. And we also know that going digital helps with competitiveness. This is, I don't have to explain it. But we also see it in the country performance. Countries that perform well in digital tend to perform well also on the competitive side. What is much less clear is the correlation between green and competitive. At the level of countries, there is almost no correlation, very little correlation. And at the level of individual SMEs, when you talk to them, at this stage, going green is not yet a source of competitive advantage. It can be an obligation, it can be a mission, as we have heard over these days. But it's not per se a source of competitive advantage. At the same time, being competitive, growing, exporting, being productive is crucial to going green. I don't know if you were there for listening to Blue Lobster presentation yesterday, an amazing company. And it is able to sell sustainable products because it has a wide market, it exports. Thereby, growing the market, it is able to lower the green premium and be competitive on the market. So there is a strong correlation, there is a potential strong correlation, but it's not yet there at the level of countries and at the level of most SMEs in the countries. Now, here are the results. And you can find all the details on the report, and we have a website that I will point to where you can see the result. It's not surprising, Nordic country come first with the Netherlands. You can see the overall ranking on the left. Now, what is clear is also that no one leads in everything. Everyone has an area to improve. Sweden, for one, is only number 10 in competitiveness rank, and it's actually number 14 when it comes to SME export. And Denmark is a staggering 25th on reducing consumption, SME reducing consumption. Now, there is a trick in there, obviously. This is self-reporting through Eurobarometer, which means that companies who might have a long tradition of reducing consumption, maybe they answer no when they ask if they introduce new measure to reduce consumption. This is the trick and the challenge of self-reporting, in particular when you don't have constant time series, as in the case of Eurobarometer. Now, at the same time, even on the lower end of the spectrum, there are surprises. Romania leads on emission reduction. Greece leads on high growth enterprises. And I mean, the dots that you see are basically surprises that you can look at in the report and in the tables, but there are plenty of them. Now, what does this mean? It means first that no one has a job done. Everyone has something to improve. But it also means that we are far from the target. No one, just Finland has achieved the 2030 goal of SME using cloud computing and data analytics. Only Romania, Lithuania, and Estonia have achieved the reduction of 55%. And only no one has achieved the goal of 30% SME exporting that is set up by the Industrial Forum as a key performance indicator. So we are pretty far from the target. When you go online, you will be able to dig deeper into it. You know, for instance, you can look at the Czech Republic on e-commerce and look at the individual performance on countries. I invite you to visit the website. In addition, today, we launched the multilingual edition. So the website is actually available in the 7 languages that you see here, and also the reports. You have the report in the 7 languages here in the room. Now, let me close down with the key takeouts. So, and I mean, everyone can do takeouts based on this sheer amount of data. There are so many angles so I invite you to take part in this analysis. But it's clear that first, no one has achieved the results, and everyone is quite far. There is still a lot of work to do for everyone. Thanks. Yes, this is the report. We need a much more joined up policy thinking between the 3 pillars. There are trade-offs. And in particular, when it comes to green and competitive, you know, we have heard about the challenge, the regulatory challenge to going green. But these are multiplied when you go green and you export, because then the reporting is often different between the member states. It can become an immense burden on SMEs. So we need to realize that there are trade-offs and that action and policy action in one area can have negative consequences, unintended consequences in other areas. Focus is on removing barriers, such as lowering the green premium and the administrative burden. The issue is SMEs still find it absurdly difficult to export within the European Union, and it's really a challenge. And in particular, regarding the next point, take the one-stop shop VAT, which is a great idea, and it's useful in some cases, but it's not fully implemented and fully deployed. It remains a burden for SMEs. Sometimes it adds on the burden for SMEs because they need the double reporting, you know, in case they do B2C or B2B. And this is the point of the last recommendation. SME test is a great tool, but it should not be as a concept applied just to policy design. It's actually an invitation to iterate when it comes to implementation and take the one-stop shop. It's good, it's a great idea. The first delivery, it's useful, but it needs to be improved continuously after it is launched. And this is the need for iteration and co-creation with business. And last but not least, we have a huge gap when it comes to data on the green transition. We are still struggling with estimates. The data that you have seen from us and from the European Commission on emissions are estimates. When you have data on going green, on reducing consumption, these are self-reporting by SMEs that says, yes, I have taken action to reduce consumption. And on top of that, it's self-reporting without time series. So that can be, I mean, the data are really not at the level that should be used for such an important target as the green transition. We need to get better. We need to work to rely less on self-reporting and much more on actual data about behavior. And that's, we are working, and the OECD is doing a tremendous work on tracking green indicator using administrative data sources and new data sources such as energy consumption directly from energy provider. And this is an area where we really want to work. And in general, there is a lot of work to do, not just to deliver the green transition, but to actually track it. And we welcome any contribution, and we invite you all to join us in this journey. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David and speakers. Before we gather some questions from the audience, let me ask our speakers some question. some questions, or at least one, to each of you. First of all, Uti, I would like to ask you, you've talked about regulation, and this is becoming a barrier for SMEs to be green, digital, and competitive. So do you think that the Commission could propose or should propose regulatory measures or deregulatory measures, and in which areas to increase competitiveness of SMEs?
Thank you, Maria. A very central question, and as we are preparing for the SME relief package, which the Commission has announced to put forward next year, better regulation is one of the core elements that we are looking into. And this has come up again in a large number of sessions that we have had during the last 3 days. But talking about a new measure to deregulate is maybe not the optic in which we look at this, because for us regulation is really a process where we continuously evaluate the existing rules and see what is fit for purpose. We even have a platform, as many of you know, for discussing rules, and the SME envoys are one of the many fora which send a participant to the Fit for Forum regulatory discussions chaired by our Vice President. We do impact assessments, and as I heard yesterday in the panel on the SME test, there is a lot of scope for improving, but of course the best policy is to have the right rules adopted so that when time goes and the world changes, you can adjust them, but you don't start with the wrong things. So impact assessments with a very good SME test is something where we can certainly improve. We have also announced that we will put more emphasis on the competitiveness check when preparing new legislation. Since last year, the Commission is running a pilot on 1 in, 1 out, which means that we are obliged to look at the cumulative burden, and when new rules are put in place, then something else should go out if the new rules create new burdens. I've heard a lot of comments that this is not the case, but it's a new policy. We reported on the first pilot, and there needs to be more attention to that in the future. Then speaking about things like a moratorium for new legislation, this is a proposal which is in the air, to be seen what the right moment is for new regulations to enter into force. But it is of course natural that SMEs need enough time to adjust if there's a new rule. But I would like to say as the basic principle that we don't think that our body of regulations is wrong. It's just that it needs continuous improvement, and the evaluation of upcoming legislation is something which is really important.
Thank you, T. Ben, you spoke about financing. This is one of the issues that SMEs are seeing as a challenge or difficulty. So now in the current context of inflation and difficulties due to high energy prices and high prices of raw materials, can SMEs look to bank lenders to take a supportive approach in financing?
Okay, if I may, can I also make a comment on the question you asked to Uti, because I think it's very important. This notion of a moratorium on regulation is, as you mentioned, flying around. Some people are saying we should just stop all European legislation and allow businesses to breathe. We, as Eurochambres, don't support that. It seems like a very blunt approach to the problem, and I think far more sensibly, as Uti said, and as our SME test work yesterday implied, we need to look at every piece of legislation, look at its merits, look at the costs, and crucially consider the cumulative burden. So not just look at that piece of legislation in isolation, but consider it in the broader context of the regulations that businesses have to comply with, the reporting obligations and the compliance obligations of that. And if we can do that, then we can help businesses. And regulation isn't necessarily bad for business. There is positive regulation, particularly at European level, that helps to make the single market more accessible to businesses. Moving on to the issue of access to finance, it's very difficult. Banks are effectively charging a risk premium to lend money at the moment because they know that businesses are struggling. They have to protect their business model as well, and it's very difficult for businesses, particularly small businesses with relatively few assets, to borrow money at the moment, and that's just money to cover their costs, which are going up because of inflation, rather than to invest. So it is indeed very difficult. We need to look at other ways of helping businesses, whether that's tax credits on investment or other kind of tax changes. But of course, at the same time, public authorities are looking to increase taxes to cover all of the costs that they're incurring to help the society deal with rising prices. So it's a very tricky situation for businesses, and financing is extremely limited, and you could see that in the slides. I think it's reflected in forecasts for investments for next year as well.
Yeah, this is in fact one of the issues that are included in the SME relief package. Still, access to finance is going to be an important issue. So and I open the floor also to the audience to see how can we still develop this policy that we have been promoting for many years, but it's still a problem, it seems. So my last question before asking all of you here, to David, you spoke about green, digital, and competitive. So how can we, from the European Commission, from the member states, associations, how can we help SMEs really achieve this transformation and still be competitive?
Well,
difficult question.
I think everyone has a role to play. For most areas, it's not a problem of money. I mean, energy is a special thing. We're in a special condition. But for most area, it's not an issue of money. It's not an issue in particular of funding this digital transition per se or the green transition per se. There are particular, we should be future-looking, what I mean. Focus on opening and creating new markets, in particular when it comes to the green transition. Deploy the technologies that are already there in order to lower the green premium, so that ultimately they become cheaper. And that's what we have to fund. The financial intervention needs to go in that direction. For the rest, I think, I'm in favor of framework condition most of all. So look at what are the obstacles that are there, and when you intervene, iterate to see that whether this works, as in the case of the one-stop shop or in the case of the various directives on recycling. You will have to see how the actual, one thing is the intention, one thing is the impact assessment ex ante, but it's really important to monitor on a regular basis what is going on, and I don't think this is done enough.
I found it very interesting, the link that you mentioned between digital and competitiveness. I think we all saw that during the pandemic. And we discussed it yesterday that maybe the link between green and competitive is more clear now with the energy crisis. So do you think this will help the green transition? Because member states we saw that in the SME Envoys network, member states are deploying green technologies very fast now in order to reduce dependency from fossil fuels. Yeah. And
I mean, it goes in both directions. So I think it's up to us to make sure that it goes in the direction of the green transition. It can backfire. It can, we are reopening also coal production. So it's not unless we act on it, it will not accelerate green transition per se. We need to steer it that way.
Well, thank you for your contributions. And now I open the floor to the audience for questions, comments, or whatever. There's Céline.
Well, thank you very much. I'm Céline Kaufman from the OECD. It's a fantastic panel, a wealth of information, very much in line as well with some of the current trends that we're seeing at the OECD, in particular from the SME Finance Scoreboard. I have a couple of questions. You're opening a lot of boxes, but I have a couple of questions that we are pondering at the OECD as well. The first one has to do with a topic that is implied, which is related to what we see happening with bankruptcies across countries. We actually don't see an increase in the bankruptcy rates of SMEs in the last years because of the support provided by countries, but we know that some of these companies may close without going through bankruptcies as well. So do you have some data and idea of what's happening, in the body of SMEs in terms of their survival, their closing, and so on? And related to that, I was wondering as well whether you are monitoring the startup rates across countries, because we're talking about Schumpeter. Do you see more dynamic startup rates across EU countries or not? The second area that we are lacking a bit information and data, and we're very much interested, is SME trading, capacity. Do you monitor that? Do you have any information on the capacity of SMEs in these difficult times to export, enter global value chain, in particular with the objectives of the EU in this area? And the last one has to do with what you mentioned in terms of, and we know of the very strong supports that governments have provided to SMEs for the pandemic, during the pandemic, but again now, to weather the impacts of the increase in energy prices. And I'd be very interested in any feedback information that you would have in terms of the impacts of those measures that were taken by countries, what we can expect from the recovery and resilience plans as well, and whether you are monitoring that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Céline. Who wants to take the floor? Ben?
I don't really have any additional data to that which I already presented regarding bankruptcies. We haven't heard anything anecdotally that bankruptcies are increasing. Chambers are concerned that it will increase. As I mentioned during the, and Céline mentioned it too, during the pandemic, a lot of measures were taken to help businesses absorb the negative impact of that. But the public authorities can't keep doing that. It's simply not sustainable. So there is a fear that insolvencies and bankruptcies will increase if these public measures are not maintained, and at the same time bank lending and other sources of financing become tougher. In terms of SME trading, similarly, apart from the slide I showed you, which indicates that there will be a drop in exports next year, we don't know whether that means that businesses who don't yet trade abroad have decided that they will continue not trading abroad, or whether it's SMEs that already trade abroad who think they will trade less. I don't have the granular data on that, but nonetheless there's a legislative aspect to this as well. We're working at European level on a new directive on corporate sustainability and due diligence, which is about ensuring that businesses in complex supply chains are aware of the environmental and human rights implications of the companies they're working with internationally. And we need to make sure that proposal doesn't become onerous and preclude businesses from entering these complex supply chains. So it's tricky, but we need to get the balance right there.
And Ben, do you include some information on the report on startups?
I'm afraid I don't have any data on startups. It was interesting.
Next year, maybe. Next year.
Maybe. There was yesterday a woman from our Ukrainian member, the Ukrainian chamber, Olga, was presenting data from there, and I was really struck by the fact that she said that there's been a significant increase in startups in Ukraine since the 24th of February. It's which is heartwarming, but I'm afraid I couldn't say whether that's reflected across Europe.
David, you
Yes,
wanted to read.
I don't think Ukraine is very special. They are very special. So I don't think Europe is behaving the same way. Just, I mean, on the first point, startups, I think the report by the European Commission, performance review, has quite a good overview. There is a bounce back. That's what I read. But on export, I don't know I don't have an answer. But I can tell you that export are pretty stable when it comes to SME. The percentage of SME that export has not increased much in recent years. And we are 5% or 6%, and we have a target of 30%, and I don't see how we get there in any way. And the last point was, yes, about policy measures. And I mean, I read the OECD reports to learn about the recovery and SMEs. But what I can tell you is that recovery was a time for universal measures, and governments are pretty good at that. But now it's not a time, I mean, energy is a particular, but in general, SME support is not for universal measures, should be targeted, and governments are not yet good at that, in particular using their own data to target the help. So I think this is my strong recommendation for the future.
Oti.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe I pick up from where you ended, David. The impact of the recovery and resilience plans and what we know by now. We have published some studies, and of course all the people across the Commission who work on looking at the data have analyzed what we have. The amount of money going to small businesses, if you look at all the national plans and take all the measures which are earmarked for SMEs, then you have roughly 10% of the overall package. Then if you look at measures which are meant for companies overall, where probably most of the recipients will be small businesses, and take a very broad view, then you could go to a maximum of 1/4 of the whole package. So the truth is going to be somewhere between 10 and 25% in terms of the amounts. And of course, as we know, the focus is on greening and on digitalization. 57% of the money at least has to go to green and digitalization. We have published some data on where the money goes, and I understand you have seen that. Now with the huge increase in energy prices and the aim to go further and faster in terms of increasing our energy dependencies on Russia and attacking the high prices of energy, there can be changes to put even more money to the energy conversion. So that's on the RRPs. To be efficient with time, indeed, on startups, look at our last report, and we have a small number of paper copies here at the entrance of the room. So if somebody is interested in taking a copy of the last SME performance review, then please take one with you when you leave the room. On SMEs trading across borders, we are now looking at how we can celebrate and take stock of the single market 30 years. Next year is the big year of celebration of 30 years the single market in its current shape. And we are looking at where we have come, what has been achieved, where we could go next, and we will publish a package of documents in January in that respect. SMEs in general do not export, as you said. Most of the SMEs have a local business model. They have no intention, they have no ambition to export. Then there are SMEs which export and which have a global outreach, but these are the minority. We have asked SMEs why they don't export, and for most of them the simple answer is it's not in my business model and I don't intend to export. But those which export, there's a very clear bias towards exporting to other EU countries. And then the second thing which you see in data is geography. Those on the outer borders of the EU tend to export to the neighboring countries. But this very clear EU bias still gives us the confidence that the single market works. One could have expected during the pandemic to see more exports as the economy shifted more into the digital mode, e-commerce. This so far is not very clear in the data that I have seen. And of course, probably the traditional obstacles which small businesses quote in exporting, lack of skills, lack of capacity to deal with different regulatory requirements in the country where you would export, language skills. I assume that these still apply even if more consumers are interested in buying online.
Thank you. We had another question over there, and 2, 3.
Well, this is like more a comment. I'm Salvatore Roxas from DG Grow, and I want to comment on the aspects concerning access to finance. I just wanted to mention on the positive side that under InvestEU, which is the investment program that has been launched by the Commission last year, and it really aims at addressing situation of market failure and suboptimal level of investments. There's a specific window that is called SME window, so addressing the needs of SMEs, and there's specific products, guarantee products, addressing financial intermediaries that are willing to assume and to create portfolios of loans for companies, riskier portfolios, and to the budgetary guarantee. Parts of the risk will be absorbed by the Commission contribution. On the positive side, there are two products, one on sustainable guarantee, which is basically addressing portfolios of activities targeting the 6 criteria of the sustainable finance taxonomy. This is one. And the second one is under the competitiveness guarantee, there's a product addressing the support to solvency. So basically, we know that after the issue of the pandemic, lots of companies are over-leveraged, and then they basically need to get funding, but not to overburden their balance sheet. So basically, through subordinated loans, they can do it. Positive side, the request from financial intermediaries exceeded by far, the amount of budget that was available. So there's a strong appetite from financial intermediaries to do this type of things. The negative things is that, of course, money is very limited. InvestEU has also a member states compartment, so member states can also contribute and increase the firepower of the program. So far, only 5 member states contributed very little through structural funds or RRPs to this compartment. So maybe this is where, if we want to increase the resources and the magnitude and the impact, maybe we have to try to mobilize, resources from any side.
Okay, thank you for the information. Just a couple of questions more.
Can I quickly, since I'm sitting right next, I just wanted to make a quick comment, Anna Glyceras for Amazon, because Uti, you mentioned that most SMEs are not a big fan of exporting, or there might be obstacles to exporting. I just wanted to share a metric, because it's interesting that the SMEs who sell on the Amazon marketplace, they're all digital, obviously, and we see that a majority of them actually export. Last year they have generated 14.5 million in exports, and that's growing year over year. Like from last year to this year, it was actually an increase of 10%. So just to underline the point that David made about the link between digitization and competitiveness, I think that's an interesting data point.
Thank you. Next question. Out of time, but still 3 minutes.
Well, I'm curious about if there's any division in policy making when it comes to innovative digital climate solutions and when it comes to other SMEs, or if the only distinction is that it's the size of the company. Because if you say the lion part of the emissions are made by SMEs, I would guess that it's not the digital ones, it's not those that solve emission problems. It would rather be the others. But if policy is made on statistics on the size of the companies, we won't promote, for instance, public procurement, radically improved public procurement of innovative solutions, increasing the markets. And I don't see any economic performance metrics either in the new program to follow that. Curious about that. What are your comments?
Uti, can you react on that?
Yeah, very quick reaction indeed, because I'm one of the panelists in the concluding session, so I have to run there. But last year we had a special edition on digitalization where we looked at SMEs more by the sector in which they operate. Of course, in particular during the pandemic, what you would see was a huge difference between those which worked in the digital area, which continued to grow very fast during the pandemic, and all the others which basically suffered a lot of the pandemic. And what we try to promote is, of course, digitalization. We have policies, digital innovation hubs, other support to digitalization so that we would help also the laggards. There was, however, and you are already aware of that, there was a huge correlation between the size of the company and the degree of adoption of modern digital technologies. The smaller the company, the less the companies even saw the need in our survey to have a website or start basic online selling. And the larger the company, then probably there was specialized stuff and there was more digital technology. So it's to some extent an issue of company size and having the right skills, and to some extent there is a difference between digital and non-digital sectors, which especially during the pandemic was very large. And we try to take that into account and help in particular the companies which are lagging behind. But our study last year very clearly recognized that this is not the one-size-fits-all policy case.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you all for participating in this session, and thank you to the speakers. And let's proceed to the next session. We're coming to this end.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.